Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam, ala rasulillah. Okay, so I'm not a fitness guru by any means whatsoever. But probably understandably so. Many of you have been sending a lot of questions and asking for recommendations. Again, my advice would be to seek somebody who is professional at this. I am merely a bald-headed, middle-aged imam who, alhamdulillah, was blessed, number one, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ, and who got fed up with just the status quo. So very quickly, some people have been asking me about what am I doing? And I've made a couple other videos about this, right? And so I'll just simply say again, there's no single thing that I'm doing, right? It's a multitude of many different things that are informed by a general attitude and that are executed by a program, right? So, right, the attitude is what germinates the plan. I want to get in shape. That's such an abstract concept. What does get in shape mean, right? And then the program that executes that plan. So some people said, wow, it looks like in a very short amount of time, you have dropped a fair amount of weight and you seem to have put on a fair amount of muscle. Yes, that is true. I would say that in the last, it's what, December? So yeah, let's rewind the clock back to, or not, it's almost December. So let's rewind the clock back to late November, December last year. So let's say within the last 12 months, it's true. I have and again, this is all, I'll just put out the numbers, but I don't want you to become fixated on numbers. So, that being said, yes, to date, I have dropped 70 pounds on the scale. However, that is not completely, that's not the totality of it, but yes, that certainly is a very positive number, alhamdulillah. I lost 70 pounds from where I was about 12 months ago. So I was at 300 pounds. And I'm now at 230 pounds. Now, that has to also be taken into account in the fact that I am a fairly large, normal size person. I'm about somewhere between 6'4", 6'5". I have a moderately decent sized frame. So like I'm a taller than average dude, right? So 300 pounds, without a doubt, is a lot of weight. However, it depends on like who you're, like if you're 5 feet 7 inches and you're 300 pounds, that's probably right. Quite a bit of a different story. And then underneath the well padded, right, underneath that 300 pounds was still a lot of muscle memory from my youth when I was fairly active playing sports and whatnot. And then obviously there's a genetics part to this that I didn't even realize, that I had. So in the last 12 months, yes, I dropped 70 pounds. But I've also been able to ascertain that I've put on about 15 pounds of muscle, right? That is an important part. I have lost 14 inches off of my waist, which is, really crazy. And so when I was saying before about this idea, like, having a plan and it being very abstract, like, I want to get in shape. But what does that mean? What does getting in shape mean? Or people say, I want to drop some weight. Well, I can tell you for a fact, right, that you're always fatter than you think. I definitely didn't think that I had 70 pounds. Matter of fact, I probably can drop, Well, I don't know, but I'll put it to you this way. If you had talked to me 13 months ago and said, hey, how much weight do you think you need to lose? I'd say, I could probably drop about 20, 30 pounds. Well, I can definitely tell you that I have way more than 20 or 30 pounds to lose. And of course, it all is dependent upon what your broader goals. Now, I was a person suffering from a very aggressive form of what you basically call metabolic syndrome, right? I had type 2 diabetes, really bad insulin resistance. And so that was triggering a whole cascade of issues. And so again, even now, yes, 70 pounds down, added 15 pounds of muscle. I can definitely tell. And I'm like, my stomach is flat now, alhamdulillah. But I can kind of almost see my abdominal muscles starting to kind of peek through. Now, this has to be also taken into account because people have different body types. Even when I was young, when I was playing football, basketball, even going back to high school, right? I never really had ripped abs, even when I was like a young, skinny kid. That's just not my body type. So for me to get like some, washboard, 6-pack of abs, it's probably not my body type. I also have to be somewhat moderately realistic at 50 years old that I'm going to have that kind of aesthetic look. Now, I don't know, maybe that's really important to you. For me, the most important thing was just being healthy, right? And so I wanted to be healthy again because I went through about a 20-year period in my life, which, up until recently, up until 10 years ago, that was half of my life, right? So I went through a major chunk of my life not being healthy. And so I wanted to be healthy again. And so that's the predominant thing. Yes, of course, it's nice to look aesthetically pleasing. And that is also one of my goals. Like, I do want to feel good about the way when I look in the mirror, right? Like now, I got one of these like hipster, joints, right? And I'm not even flexing right now, but it's just the way, like, alhamdulillah, put on a little muscle, bald-headed dude with, looking good. Like, I do want to look aesthetically pleasing, but I also know that I don't want to have an aesthetically pleasing look at the cost of health, because there are people that, whether through different forms of supplementation or working themselves over too hard, that they may look aesthetically pleasing, but in reality, they're not healthy. So for me, I definitely want to have comprehensive health. Two, for me, and this is to address one person's comment that I'll get to in a second, to me, this was a natural extension of my Islam, of wanting to be physically strong again, physically fit, and physically healthy again, right? For me, this was also related to my Islam, in that what I have kind of rediscovered now by, alhamdulillah, getting back into shape, is that there is a very strong mind-body connection, at least for my personality type, to put myself in a certain kind of mood. I know particularly as men, we don't tend to talk about things like mood and hormones, especially in the way that we talk about women, women and their emotions and women and their moods and women and their hormones. Well, guess what? Everybody's got moods, hormones, and emotions, right? Men as well. Now, they may not be of the same intensity or the same type, but we all have them. And so what I remembered about my initial years as a young Muslim, going back, when I was 18, right, 18, 19, 20 years old, like in those initial, right, was one, I was playing ball all the time. I was much more physically fit. And so I had a more visceral connection with my practice of the deen. And so I wanted to kind of try to recapture that lightning in a bottle, so to speak, of just being more energized, more positive. When you go through 1 or 2 decades of, chronic pain and chronic fatigue and chronic, right? When you go through all those issues, it eventually bleeds over into your Islam, your practice as a Muslim. And so for me, and I'm addressing this person, right? Earlier today, a person said, hey, I appreciate all of your posts about, food and fitness and whatnot, but, I wish you would go back to making your videos about religion, which is the reason why I followed you in the first place. And so my response to that is, well, this is about religion, and that in my estimation, and I'm going to, this is just my opinion. I think obviously it will apply to men and women, but I've been doing this particularly to encourage guys to think really about their health. And in my estimation, I think one thing that many Muslim men are missing today in their connection with their Islam is, right, they're maintaining of the body, because this is the hardware and the software that all that is going to run upon. When I think back, people say, hey, how did you learn Arabic? You were really young, you became Muslim at 18, and within 1 year, you gained fluency in Arabic. How did you do it? And so when I used to think about it, I would say, well, I did A, B, and C. I read this book and I did this amount of drills and I did, okay, that's all true. But you know what? The other thing that was in the background that now that I can appreciate more, the thing that was riding in the background was what? I was young. My mind was functioning at a much better level, not simply because I was younger. I mean, that's true. You get a little older, you have your senior moments, right? But I'm also not that old. I realized, like, yes, I'm 50, but I'm not ancient, right? And so part of the reason why I was able to memorize Quran, why I was able to, gain a certain foothold or mastery over the Arabic languages or other, is because the background of all those pursuits were running on a body that was healthy and a mind that was healthy and moods that were healthy and outlooks, dispositions of almost like reckless optimism. That's where all of those things were running on. And so I think now that I've had a chance to re-experience some of that again, and now I'm going back and thinking, I think some of those initial reflections that I made about how did I learn A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z were perhaps a little short-sighted because I didn't appreciate the importance of almost what I will call ambient health, right? Ambient good health, right? Like ambient in the idea of like, something kind of in the background that you don't really pay attention to. It's there. That I do believe has a lot to do with it. Not only, especially now we understand the idea of like neuroplasticity and right, that the brain maintains neuroplasticity, right, throughout life. And so I began to rethink like, and so I've rediscovered, like even in my own studies, like as I've been, getting stronger and healthier, that I do generally have like a very optimistic point of view. And when I sit down and when I study, even a person commented, he's like, man, I've really benefited. And this is not alhamdulillah, whatever, walillahi alhamd, right? To Allah belongs all the praise. I'm just giving this as an example. One person said, your khutbah over the last 12 months, right? Your Friday sermons that you give over the last 12 months. He said, you've always been a very good public speaker. You have a pleasant voice. You've always been good at giving khutbah, but I've really connected with your khutbah over the last 12 months. And he's like, I think, man, whatever you're doing, right? The lifting, the training, it's bleeding over and it's having an impact, in that area. And so, to that person, like, don't worry, like my day job is still an imam. But yes, at this moment in my life, I'm doing my job, clocking in, doing my hours, but yes, right now, all of my free time that I have is dedicated to the restoration of my health. Because again, if you've never been through a multi-decades long, protracted, chronic illness and sickness, then perhaps you cannot appreciate why at this moment that does seem to be the fixation and the concentration. don't worry, there will still be more, and again, that's, every Friday I'm doing that. Every Saturday I'm teaching my tafsir class. But I'm also trying to use this as a teaching moment for other people that, hey, don't try to study the Quran in a vacuum. Don't try to study, ulum al-hadith, or don't try to study Arabic. Don't try to do all of these religious, spiritual pursuits in a vacuum while neglecting, right, the very platform that is going to be reliant upon, right? I mean, you got to use your brain. You got to have energy. You got to have motivation, right? You've got to have concentration to do all of those things. And so one thing that will vastly, vastly help you in that is just kind of, again, cultivating a kind of reckless optimism within yourself that definitely germinates in the body. And so that's why. And so now, go back to what am I doing? So yes, I'm obviously lifting weights. Cardio is great. Obviously, having cardiovascular health is very important. But the way that I weight train, I actually get an elevated level of heart rate right when I work out. So I tend to do, as they say, right, high intensity interval training, HIIT training. I use a lot of supersets, meaning like I'll do multiple exercises back to back, right, without taking a break. So yesterday when Muhammad and Ibrahim came through, a couple of young dudes came through, and we had a workout yesterday. I had two great supersets. And so the way that I did that is I had in each one, I had about 4 or maybe 5 exercises. Each one was done consecutively as one round. And then you would take a 10-second break and go back and do another round, and then you would take like a 1-minute break, and then you would go do the second one. So, altogether, yeah, it might take like 20, 25 minutes. It's extraordinarily intense. At least, actually Muhammad, who used to be a personal trainer, he was kind of like just coasting, right? I'm sitting there, dying and drenched in sweat. And so getting the heart rate up, definitely weight training. I feel like a lot of the way that when people conceive of exercise, they think of things like, oh, I'm going to get on a treadmill. I'm going to go ride a bike. And those are all great things to add. I'm not saying you shouldn't do your treadmill or your elliptical, right? But most people, and especially once you pass 30 years old, you're going to lose skeletal cohesion. You're going to, which is based upon your loss of muscle density, right? So as your muscles atrophy and shrink, so do all those connective tissues shrink and become weaker. And so it's not only about building muscles, right? It's also about building the connective tissues that link those muscles to your joints, right? And so I was laughing that 13 months ago, I couldn't hardly run, right? If I ran, it didn't look good, right? It was not pretty. Now I can actually full bore sprint and run, and I don't feel like I'm going to fall apart like, a pair of Lincoln logs, like I'm just going to disintegrate. Because that has been the result of not only putting on the 15 pounds of muscle, but all of the things that go along with that, right? The connective tissues, right? So you get skeletal cohesion, you build muscle, that also then will raise your basic metabolic rate of like how much fat will you burn, how many calories will you burn, even in a resting state. And then also for, bone density, right? These are all things, both men and women, although women perhaps more accelerated than men, that you will lose as you pass that, 30-year mark. But it doesn't have to be sort of like a death sentence. And I think another part that kind of helped motivate me about a year or so ago, I was talking to my friend Jason, old friend of mine back from Michigan. And in this conversation, he was like, well, enjoy this last period of your life because, you can't build muscle after, 45 years old. And I was like, you know what, dude, hold my non-alcoholic beer. I'll be right back. And that's an absolute lie. Now, building muscle at 50 years old is definitely not going to be like building muscle at 20 years old. That is an uncontested truth. But different and perhaps even more challenging versus impossible, these are two different things. So I personally feel that Muslims today, there is also, using that word ambient, I feel like there's a lot of ambient depression that people have in their Islam and in their lives. And so their very approach to religion, or rather their inability to connect with their religion, is, I would definitely say, if not causation, because that would be perhaps a bit too much, there's definitely a correlation between that and the loss of physical health and strength. And again, especially its impact on hormones, moods, emotions. I was listening to a video this morning by Lee Priest, who is a Australian bodybuilder. Very interesting guy, right? He's a real little dude too. I think he actually beat Ronnie Coleman. Like, so if you know anything about bodybuilding, right? So he's like 5 feet 4 inches. So as a little kid, he was bullied, right? He was bullied all the time. And he spoke about it, and it was interesting. And I know it won't be very popular today. And I don't know, I may put up a segment of it because unfortunately he uses a little bit of 4-color language. So maybe I can find a way to beep it out, or, whatever. So anyway, in this, to summarize, he was saying, like, today I hear kids talk about being depressed and anxious. He's like, I know that this won't be popular to hear because of the modern discourse around discussing mental health. He's like, you know what? When I was a kid, I was bullied. We were all bullied, but we didn't respond to the bullying by going and getting a gun and going back to our school and shooting everybody up. Like, he's like, you learn to become resilient. And so I feel that, far too many Muslims today are they're just simply not resilient in their religion, and in several different ways. One, this lack of resiliency amongst us as Muslims has cultivated a tendency and a desire, in a kind of a way of having a crutch, that we want to then live vicariously through people that we see online, on Instagram, people that we see in religious leadership. And so you have people that make comments like, hey, go back to making videos about, more conventional religious things because that's why I follow you. Well, number one, I have been making content and videos now for years, so I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that you can go on and still that you haven't exhausted. And you know what? Watch it again, right? This idea of, this is another thing that I can kind of beef about, is this idea that you have to keep doing these one-offs. Like, that becomes exhausting, right? How about go back and watch it again, and maybe you'll learn something a second time, right? Give me a day off. So that, we tend to live vicariously through these people that we see online, even though we have no actual personal connection with them. And so that only further creates a sense of isolation, disconnect in us. And you can't live your Islam and anything else through a person online on a screen. You gotta go do it yourself. And in fact, I would say, if there's one of the greatest blessings that Allah gave me, was just an insatiable curiosity combined with a very, I was very unconscious of what I was doing, right? So when I was a brand new Muslim at 18 years old, and I set off to memorize Quran, and I set off to learn the Arabic language, it was, number one, out of a deep, profound internal curiosity that I had always had since a kid. And two, I wasn't even thinking about it, right? It was a very unconscious thing. I wasn't trying to be like nobody. I was actually just trying to be me, right? I wanted to explore those things. And so while there are, alhamdulillah, we have all these wonderful, teachers and mashayikh and asatid and sheikhas, and, we have all these wonderful men and women that can teach us. But I really wonder, is it true teaching, or is it more a kind of Islamo entertainment and also a kind of pacifier, that we take all of this content, which is a bizarre word, right? Religious content. Are we really doing anything to take that into our own hands, our own responsibility to learn? I don't know. So I really feel like, before you say like, oh, go back, shut up and dribble, go back to just teaching religion, enough of all this health stuff. Well, that's what I need to do right now, and this is where I'm at. Don't worry, I will come back around, and I'm still doing those other things. All right, to wrap up very quick, what is my daily routine like? Okay, so like I said, I do high intensity interval training because I get bored easily. So the intensity helps to keep me focused. If I'm in there, an hour and a half, it's not going to work. So keeping it short, sweet, and very intense keeps me focused, also gets me the benefits I need for my heart health, and it builds, right? It helps to really build the muscle. 2, you got to eat, and you have to eat well. So tracking your food. And you don't have to pay for it. You can go get a free version of like MyFitnessPal, whatever that it is. I use this thing called LifeSum. It's a tracker. You don't have to get one that you pay for, but you do need to track your food, because I can tell you 2 things. You're definitely eating more carbs, and especially drinking more carbs, because I know you guys out there like your Starbucks, macchiato, frappuccino, right? You are definitely consuming more carbohydrates than you think. And many of us are to the point where we have either some type of low, mid, or high grade metabolic syndrome, which means that we're drowning in carbohydrates. So you want to do that. Now, my particular macros that I need for mine is a 45-35-20 split, right? So 45% protein, 35% fat, and 20% carbs. Now, I track my food all day. Am I hyperneurotic down to the gram? No, but at the same time, I track my food. And so that I am trying to hit those. I also have a particular caloric limit that I want to hit every day. It's debate. I know it's a debate. I personally have found benefit, at least right now, working at a deficit. So I aim for about 1,700 calories a day. Now, you have to figure out what works for you, which, for a big guy, that's not a lot of calories. But at the same time, I've found with this particular split of 45% protein and 35% fats, those are going to be the most satiating of the 3 major macronutrient groups, that I don't really feel hungry throughout the day. So when I eat, I feel satiated for hours. And then if I, work out and then I go to bed, right, I feel satiated for hours. 3, I still practice my intermittent fast. I probably am down to maybe 5 days a week, right, where I have about 2 days off from that. And it's still the 16-8, right? So I fast for 16 hours, have an 8-hour eating window. So typically I will eat at 10 a.m. up until 6 p.m. No food, no calories after 6 p.m. That's what I'm doing. That's pretty much it. And so maybe number 4, I do this every single day. No days off. Now, I'm not saying you have to work out 7 days a week, but this grand plan and grand program, like even in a day, like I probably do work out about 6 days a week, sometimes close to 7. And I know there are different theories. This is what I'm experimenting and I find working with myself right now. You may do, a day on, 2 days off, 2 days, 3 days off, whatever, right? But even in the days where, let's say, I don't lift, which isn't often now, but a day I don't lift, I'm still tracking my food. Even when I have my cheat day, like maybe twice a month, I have a moderate cheat day, right? I don't go crazy, but I have a moderate cheat day. I'm still tracking my food, right? And I'm making sure that there are certain mental protocols in place so that a cheat day doesn't turn into a cheat week, that doesn't turn into a full-blown affair. So it's a 24-hour lifestyle commitment. However, I've gotten to a certain point now where it also kind of feels unconscious. I don't feel like I'm trying to do it. And that's where you want to, in the beginning, perhaps, I don't know, I tend to have a somewhat extreme personality in that if I'm going to do something, I'm going to go all the way from the rooter to the tutor. That's it. That's just my personality. Some people are more tepid. So that might assist me a little bit in getting up to speed to where now I don't feel like I'm really having to, the only time I really feel like I'm exerting myself is when I go lift, right? Other than that, I don't really feel like I'm doing anything. I'm just doing me. That's what I'm doing in a nutshell. I also found that, while there's great resources, I talk to people that are personal trainers. I take I watch a lot of YouTube videos, right? At the end of the day, you have to experiment with yourself and find out what works for yourself. Don't be afraid to mix and match, poach from here, take from there, right? Don't be afraid to do those things and find out what works specifically for you. So hopefully that will assist or clarify a little bit much. Gonna pray dhuhr, and then I gotta get ready. I gotta go face Los Angeles traffic again today. So inshallah, may Allah Ta'ala bless you in your health and in your Islam and bring those two together. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلوات الله تعالى على النبي الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.